The sound is soft at first, a rhythmic dripping, like water falling through time. The air is cool and damp, faintly scented with linen and wood. You can almost see it. Long beams stretching above you, rafters, darkened by years of steam and fiber dust. Outside, a river turns lazily through a green valley. Inside, it is quieter. Only the slow splash of the wheel and the steady sigh of moving water fill the space. Tonight, we drift back to the world of the early papermakers of Europe. Before the hum of printing presses, before books were common or cheap, there were the mill's half workshop, half monastery, places where rags became knowledge. Here, every sheet of paper was born from patient rhythm, from the repetition of movement and sound, soaking, pounding, pressing, and drying. Imagine yourself within one of these mills, perhaps in medieval Spain, where the art of papermaking first took root in the West. The air is thick with moisture. Wooden troughs are filled with pulped linen. Sunlight filters through slatted windows, glinting on the slow churn of water wheels outside. Everything moves according to rhythm, the steady drip, the press of the mold, the hanging of damp sheets one by one. This was not glamorous work. It was physical, wet, and repetitive. But within it lay something profound, the quiet creation of the very thing that would carry words across the centuries. The hands that stirred the pulp did not write the books of scholars or kings, but without them, none of those words could have endured. Morning begins early in the paper mill. Long before the sun lifts above the hills, the water wheel already turns. It is the heart of the workshop, its creak and splash echoing across the yard, feeding motion into the wooden hammers that pound linen into pulp. The workers arrive in silence, some still rubbing the sleep from their eyes. They move with the slow ease of habit, tying up sleeves, tightening belts, and stepping carefully across damp planks, slick with mist. Inside, the air smells faintly of lime, of wet fiber, and old timber. The floors are uneven, polished by generations of bare feet and heavy buckets. Along one wall, heaps of rags lie sorted by color and quality. Fine linen for the purest sheets, rougher cloth for more ordinary paper. Each bundle tells its own story. Worn garments, torn sailcloth, fragments of old banners. What once covered the body will soon carry words. The process begins with soaking. Rags are softened in water for days, until the fabric loses its form. Workers, often barefoot, step into the vats to stir them, feeling the cool resistance of the cloth beneath their feet. Then, the softened material is lifted to the pounding troughs, where water-driven mallets beat it slowly into fibers. Nearby, another worker tends the pulp, watching as the fibers suspend themselves in cloudy water. He stirs with a wooden paddle, testing the texture. To coarse, and the paper will tear. To fine, and it will lose its body. It is a balance learned through touch rather than sight, years of instinct guiding every motion. At a long table by the window, another worker dips a wooden frame the mold into a vat of pulp. With practiced care, he lifts it, letting the excess water drain away, leaving behind a thin film of fiber across the wire mesh. The sheet is then turned out onto a felt pad, pressed flat beneath a heavy screw press, and transferred again to hang along wooden rods to dry. Row upon row of pale, soft sheets sway gently in the moving air. This was the rhythm of life for the papermakers, repetitive, tactile, and steady. The water wheel turned without pause. The hammering never ceased for long. The cycle of soaking, pressing, and drying continued day after day, season after season. At times, the mill was quiet except for the hum of insects and the dripping of water. At others, it was full of motion, workers shouting above the noise of the wheel, lifting buckets, turning cranks, and stacking finished reams in careful piles. Yet beneath the labor, there was calm, a kind of peace in the constancy of the task. The paper they made would travel far beyond their small valley. It would carry letters between monasteries and merchants, poems written in candlelight, maps of distant lands. But within the mill itself, life remained simple, measured by the turn of the wheel and the slow drying of the sheets. At night, when the wheel was finally stilled, the silence of the place was deep. The smell of wet fiber lingered. Moonlight touched the drying racks, glinting on rows of unfinished pages. And perhaps as they left for home, the workers looked back at their day's labor, blank sheets waiting for words yet unwritten, and felt a quiet kind of pride. As we move forward in time, imagine the sound of water echoing along the valleys of medieval Spain. The year is around the 12th century. Wind stirs the olive groves and the scent of warm stone fills the air. Across the Iberian Peninsula, under both Christian and Islamic rule, small mills begin to appear beside clear-running streams. Each one brings with it a quiet revolution, the making of paper. The craft had traveled slowly from China to the Islamic world, and across the Mediterranean by the hands of traders and scholars. In Spain, it found a fertile home in the mills of Zativa, Toledo, and Granada, where Arabic engineers and local craftsmen combined skill and ingenuity. These were not grand buildings, but humble workshops powered by rivers and human patience. The people who worked there often could not read or write, yet they were creating the very surface upon which learning would spread. At Zativa, records tell of paper so fine it rivaled silk, made from linen rags, and finished with smooth, shining surfaces. Travelers from distant lands marveled at it, calling it papel de Yativa. Through trade and conquest, this Spanish paper made its way north to France, to Italy, and finally beyond the Alps, where monks, merchants, and scholars began to replace their precious parchment with something lighter, cheaper, and more abundant. The story of the spread of paper is not marked by great battles or grand monuments, but by quiet persistence. Mill by mill, valley by valley, the craft moved outward. In Fabriano, Italy, papermakers refined the process further, adding watermarks and better presses. In France, mills rose near Troyes and Ambert, and in England, centuries later, the first paper mill would hum to life beside a cold stream, its workers standing in the same rhythm that began in Spain. It was a slow revolution, so subtle that many never noticed it happening. Yet it changed everything. With paper came letters, ledgers, and the first printed books. The Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, all rested quite literally upon the patient work of these early papermakers. If you were to stand inside one of those Spanish mills, perhaps near the end of the day, you might hear the faint murmur of the workers speaking in many tongues: Castilian, Arabic, Catalan. You might smell the mingling of damp linen, wood smoke, the faint sweetness of beeswax used to coat the finished sheets. The light would fall softly through narrow windows, and beyond them the wheel would turn, endlessly shaping the world one thin page at a time. Centuries later, many of these early paper mills were forgotten. Timbers rotted, their stones were repurposed, and rivers shifted course, bearing what remained beneath silt and root. For a long time, no one thought much about them. They had served their purpose, and history moved on. But then, here and there, archaeologists began to find clues, fragments of water wheels, stone channels, and old molds hidden beneath layers of soil. In Spain, beneath the ruins of Zativa, the remains of one of the oldest known European mills were uncovered. Wooden beams, worn by water, still bore faint tool marks. In the mud nearby, fragments of early paper were found, pale, fragile sheets that had once carried the thoughts of a long-forgotten hand. Elsewhere, in monasteries across Europe, conservators discovered the traces of lost paper mills through the paper itself. Each mill had its own distinct watermark, a small symbol woven into the wire mesh of the mold. These watermarks were like signatures, silent testimonies of where and when a sheet was made. By studying them, scholars began to trace the journeys of medieval manuscripts, following the paper's origin across rivers, through trade routes, and into the hands of scribes. In the quiet halls of old libraries, under careful light, they hold these sheets even today. Some still carry the faint texture of linen threads, the imprint of the mesh, and the whisper of water that once flowed through them. It is strange to think that what survives of an entire craft can be found not in the buildings, but in the pages themselves, in the silent testimony of fiber and form. And yet the mystery is not entirely solved. Beneath forests and towns, lost mills still lie hidden. Old maps hint at their presence. Names like Molino de Papel or La Riera del Lenc. Streams that once powered their wheels now run quietly through fields where no sound of hammer or wheel remains. But if you listen, really listen, you might imagine the echo of water turning a wheel, the faint creak of wood, and the rhythm of the hammers that once made history possible. The world above the mill was changing rapidly. In cities, scholars debated philosophy and theology. Merchants recorded their profits in neat columns. Kings and bishops issued decrees. And all of it, every word, every record, depended on the quiet work of people who never saw their names written down. The papermakers lived at the edge of that world, in small valleys and river towns. Their labor was humble, but its influence stretched far beyond them. They did not write, but they made writing possible. They did not rule, but they made rulership visible in ink and decree. It is easy to imagine the contrast. In one place, the scholar sits in a warm chamber, quill in hand, composing a letter to a distant colleague. The candlelight flickers against a fine sheet of linen paper, smooth beneath his hand. Somewhere far away by the water's edge, another man works by lantern light, pressing that very sheet between felts, unaware of its future purpose. And yet there was quiet dignity in this work. In a world where so much depended on force or fortune, papermaking offered something else: continuity, patience, and the slow satisfaction of creation. Every sheet was a small act of faith. Faith that someone, somewhere, would use it to preserve a thought worth keeping. When printing presses began to spread in the 15th century, the mills grew busier, demand surged. But the work itself changed little. Water still turned the wheels. Hands still lifted the molds. The rhythm remained. For centuries, even as empires rose and fell. Dah! The sound of papermaking remained one of the most constant human sounds. Water, wood, and the steady pulse of creation. Now, as the night deepens, imagine the mill once more. Tss. The water wheel turns in the darkness, slow and steady. Inside, the last lanterns burn low. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of damp fiber and wood. The workers have gone home, their tools neatly stacked, their day's labor drying on the racks above. In the silence, only the river speaks, the same river that carried this craft across continents and centuries. Its voice has not changed. The papermakers of early Europe are gone, their names forgotten, but their work endures. Every book, every letter, every map still carries a trace of their touch. Even now, as you rest, surrounded by paper, perhaps a notebook on your desk, a printed page beside your bed, you are closer to them than you might think. Their world was slower, quieter, but not so different from ours. It was built on rhythm, patience, and the soft, repeating sound of water shaping words yet to be written. So let the sound of that wheel stay with you, steady, unhurried, eternal. Let it turn gently as you drift toward sleep.